his book was first published, I was a senior editor at Fortune Small Business Magazine at the
Mhm.
time. And as part of my responsibilities, I was the book editor. And one of my gripes at that time was there were not that many good entrepreneurship books to excerpt. There were only a few every year. And when his book came across my desk, I was really excited about it. It was perfect for our audience. And so we did what I believe was the first excerpt of that book before the book became big. And in working on that book, I had to make some updates to the text to make it appropriate for the magazine. For instance, we provided details about his supplements business because that would be interesting to our entrepreneurial audience.
Mhm.
And so I worked with him on the book then. And then, many years later, as I was writing about one person businesses for Forbes and I started discovering $1 million one person businesses, a number of them mentioned to me that they had been inspired by Tim Ferriss. And it made total sense to me because I was a big fan of the book, and his whole outlook on things really changed the way people think about work. And what was really interesting to me was they came to this conclusion that the 4-hour work week lifestyle was right for them for so many different reasons. Sometimes they were young people who might have gone the startup route,
Mhm.
the traditional startup route, which is all in 24/7, and decided, no, I want a lifestyle. Sometimes they were young parents or mompreneurs. Sometimes they were older people who were maybe forced out of a corporate career or looking for more of a retirement career and wanted to travel. Sometimes they were digital nomads, but they all came together around wanting to do meaningful work and also having time to do other things in life. In that work was not the most important thing in life. And that was really interesting to me, just that there was so much overlap despite all these very different lives and demographics and stages of life that were going on for them. And as I've continued to interview more than $70 million one person businesses and partnerships, that's been a common theme. Many of them have been inspired by Tim Ferriss. And I realize now what an incredible thought leader he was at that time, because people really weren't thinking about remote work as a viable possibility for the
Mhm.
general population. Now with the pandemic, it's so widely adopted. We look at it as if it never existed. But I know when I worked at Time Inc., I had premature twins, and I worked remotely for a while, for 4 years, because they had some medical issues I had to take care of. And I had to have a VPN line to tunnel into the company.
Mhm.
And it was a big deal. It was something that they didn't allow that many people to do. And they were very progressive on it. Now, every company is set up for this that's still
Mhm.
functioning in the pandemic. And he was ahead of his time on recognizing that this could be done not just by freelancers, but also by people on staff. And he provided a lot of tools for people to have that conversation with their employer or their clients so that they could make it happen. Because a lot of times these ideas are great in theory, but there's the practical reality as
Mhm.
well. I'd like to take credit for helping the book take off, but
Okay.
it took off on its own. It was a juggernaut, and I don't know. I honestly don't remember what feedback we got. We always got
Right.
read letters about different articles, but that was before anyone really knew who he was because the book
Right.
hadn't come out yet. And then it became very big, and um, I hope we contributed to his success. But I'm sure there were many, many different outlets where he appeared and many different things that he did, speaking engagements and
Right.
stunts and other things that made the book successful. And ultimately, a book has a life of its own. It really comes down to the quality of the ideas and the
Mhm.
originality and the content. So when you put something great out into the world, it's just going to spread
Right.
organically. And there's really no amount of PR or anything else can do that for you if the book isn't good. If it's good, then just getting the word out will
Mhm.
get it into the right hands. Kind of crowdsourced it. I wound up the first story I did about this, I write a blog for Forbes and I have to write 5 blogs a month. And like a lot of writers, I wait until the last minute to write all 5 of them. And so
Yeah.
it was getting towards the end of the month. And I think it was Memorial Day weekend in 2012 or 2013. I could check that for you. But I came across the US Census Bureau statistics on what are called non employer businesses. And
Mhm.
just by that name, you can tell how they're viewed as,
Yeah.
a non-entity, a non-something. Um, they weren't really getting their due, honestly, but the government was counting them. And one thing I noticed was that there were a number of them that were breaking 7 figures in revenue. And so I
Oh,
started
interesting.
going through the tables. They're not that easy to sort through. They're really used for academic research and that sort of thing. But
Mhm.
I kind of like that type of thing. And so I played around with them and I noticed that the numbers were growing.
Mhm.
And so I wrote a post about just the numbers because you cannot find out who filled out the census forms if you call the Census Bureau. It's confidential.
Mhm.
And that post went pretty viral. It was over 200,000 page views. And people were writing to me and saying, Elaine, that was really a cliffhanger. You didn't tell us who the businesses are. You just said they're X number in retail. Are they doing e-commerce? What are they doing? And so I had no way of finding out. So I started doing a series of different posts about the industries where they were overrepresented. So one would have been consulting. I think one was arts and entertainment. There were some other ones. And then as I wrote those posts, I asked people to write to me if they fit into this million
Mm.
dollar category. And they started writing to me. And it was really kind of a slow process. Over the course of a year, I heard from about five. And I did this post. I remember Alan Walton, who founded Spy Guy, an e-commerce camera store that does nanny cameras. He was one of the first ones in that post. And Rachel Charlupski, she runs the babysitting company. There were 5 of them. And that post went crazy viral. It was over 300,000 page views. And I started getting more of these folks writing to me when that was kind of out there on the internet. They would see it and say, "Hey, I'm one of those businesses." So over time, over several years, I profiled them as they came in, and I eliminated some that I thought the business wasn't the type that I wanted to profile. I was looking for businesses that the average person could run, the average smart person, street smart or college smart, it didn't matter. But I didn't focus too much on businesses that had a system they were selling people, to make $1 million or whatever. Because there's a lot of those types of businesses that make money, but I wasn't sure how much value those created. I really wanted to focus on, a nutritionist, a fitness trainer, an accounting firm, people, regular types of businesses to see how they differed from other businesses in their category that weren't getting to 7 figures. And
Okay.
over time, I formed some theories. I didn't study them scientifically, but just from interviewing so many of them and also having interviewed literally thousands of other entrepreneurs over the years, I could see what was different about them. And so that's what went into the book. And I'm still forming new theories about what differentiates them. Um, but I would say overall, it's a mindset. They are more like entrepreneurs than freelancers,
Mhm.
and they are incredible optimizers of whatever they bring to the table. One reason I don't believe in systems for starting a business is because it's so different for every type of business. And that's one of the things I found out. If you're starting an e-commerce business, it's completely different than if you're starting a nutrition business or you're becoming a manufacturer of baby food from your house and using a co-packer to pack up the baby food. Completely different. So you can't say there's the same system for every single one. There might be some basic things they have in common, but you're kind of force fitting everybody into something that doesn't really exist. But they do have this tendency to optimize whatever resources they bring to the table. And by resources, I mean not just money, I mean knowledge, I mean professional experience, even personality. You could be an extrovert. And that could be a resource for the business, or you can be an introvert, and that can be a resource. But it's kind of understanding what you personally bring to the table and then making the most of it,
Mhm.
So for instance, if you're an extrovert, maybe you would be great doing YouTube videos or Instagram or something like that to promote the business. An introvert might have a click funnel that's pulling people into the business where they don't have that much contact with the customers except digitally. There's a lot of different ways to do things.
Mhm.
And what I found was these folks optimize whatever they had basically to make the business very successful, and they're very efficient. I think they in general have very good project management skills. I have noticed a thread among a number of them that they are strong on project management or even actually worked as project managers. I just interviewed a new one yesterday who also had that background. I thought, wow, that makes a lot of sense because being organized helps a lot,
Mhm.
getting things done. So those are a few of the things that, there's some other things I noticed is in terms of the lifestyle focus. They understand that in a one person business or a partnership, you as the owner are one of the most precious resources, and they do build time into their week for other things that kind of allow them to sharpen the saw,
Mhm.
for fitness or meditation, seeing other entrepreneurs, whether it's virtually or in person, family, other things that not just work. And that allows them the mental space to really think about the business like entrepreneurs and not just be chasing one project after the other. They are big users of digital technology, but it
Mhm.
depends a lot on the industry. So Alan
Right.
Walton, he uses something called shipping easy as far
Mhm.
as packaging up the cameras and putting labels on them. That wouldn't be relevant for some of the other ones.
Right.
Um, some of them are heavily into Instagram for marketing. I do notice they're good optimizers of social media,
Mhm.
maybe not all of them at one time. Um, some of them will outsource the management of their social media advertising because they find they save money that way, even though they have to pay somebody to do it,
Mhm.
because you can burn through a lot of money that way. Um, but some of them don't use social media that much.
Mhm.
They do things other ways, and
Right.
it's a little bit organic for them.
Mhm.
I go into it a little bit for each of the case studies in the book. There are over 30 in the $1 Million One Person Business. Now it's more because there's a new version of it coming out in January where I
Mhm.
updated it with some more professional services, case studies, and a few others. Um, and so, what I encourage people to do is just read the case studies and look at how people identified what were the right technologies for them and how did they put these to work, because there isn't really, there's not kind of a one size fits all on that.
Right.
Like for e-commerce stores, a lot of people like Shopify, for instance, but it's not always the right thing. And there were a number that were on Amazon, but some felt like they wanted their sovereignty and they don't want Amazon to have all their customer data.
Mhm.
And some that were very big on Amazon in the beginning were less big on Amazon now because there's more competition. There's some problems with counterfeit businesses on there and that sort of thing. So a lot of this is evolving in real time. That's one of the really interesting things about the whole world that I'm writing about is it's really taking shape day by day, every single day. And when I go back to the entrepreneurs, their businesses have changed.
Mhm.
And one thing I said in the book, and which has proved to be very true, is being a one person business is not a religion. There might come a moment where it should be a five-person business, where it should become a scale up.
Mhm.
Some of them deliberately said, I want a boutique business. I do not want to go above one person. I don't like managing people. I love it the way it is. I make $3 million a year in revenue. I don't need any more money.
Mhm.
And there were some that kind of stuck with that point of view. But I never have taken the point of view that that's the only way,
Mhm.
because I think it's like having a family, right? My husband and I were married for a long time. We were happy together, didn't necessarily have to have kids to be any happier.
Mhm.
We did want kids, but I felt like we would have been happy anyway. Um, and then we had our twins and we loved having kids. Next thing you know, we have four kids, right? So you don't really know what you'll feel about certain things. And I think with certain businesses, people all of a sudden it gets to a certain point and they realize, oh, I'd love to become a job creator, or I would like to have it be a small business and keep it to 10 people so I don't have to do all the work myself.
Mhm.
and not rely on contractors. I really want the people on payroll so that I know they're always there. So there's a lot of decisions people might make, and there's no judgment to this book as to what you should do because it's so different for each person. But my point of view is if you run a great one person business, then you have options. If you run a business where you're kind of skin of the pants, you're just going from one project to the next, worrying about people paying you on time, you don't have any options really. You're just scrambling, and you might be worse off than having a job where at least you get your paycheck every week.
Mhm.
So the point is just to help people run a better one person business, and it doesn't have to be a seven-figure business. What if you make you're one person living in Tennessee and you make $100,000 a year? That's pretty good.
Mhm.
Have a
Right.
good quality of life, and that might be all you need to be happy. But it's better to make that easily than through grueling 24/7 work,
Mhm.
right? So that's what you can learn from these entrepreneurs. And it's really the little tidbits that they shared that I felt were most valuable.
Mhm.
If you read their stories, you'll see these lightning bolts, I'm sorry, light bulbs going on, in their heads about how to do things easier, and then how they solved the pain points in their business that can be really helpful. I based
Okay.
that on the census data, so it's on the
Okay.
ones that have the most representation. The biggest category right now is professional services, which is kind of counterintuitive, right? Because people
Right.
think a service business you cannot make, you're trading time for dollars, as Tim would say.
Mhm.
Um, but the reality is, if you have a creative business model, you don't really have to do it that way. And in the new book, I have some new business models that people came up with. One of them, he's an auditor, Steve Ferreira. He runs something called Ocean Audit, and he does a commission-based model where what he does is he finds errors. If J.C. Penney orders 100,000 shirts from overseas, and then
Mhm.
the shipping company bills J.C. Penney, they might make a mistake that's like $250,000. So he goes through the bill and he finds the error, and then he goes to J.C. Penney and says, "I've discovered this $250,000 error on your bill.
Mhm.
I can tell you what it is and collect it for you, but I have to get a 50% commission."
Mm.
Right? So he has almost a $2 million one man business.
Wow.
If he charged by the hour, there's no way he could ever charge an hourly rate that would equal the benefit that he provides to that company, especially
Mhm.
now with the economy in trouble.
Right.
So he looked creatively and came up with this other model based on commissions. And it wasn't always what was done in his industry. But I really encourage people to think about, how do you create value-based pricing? And he's one example. Another one that I added is Jamie J, who might interest you. He's a podcaster, and he does custom podcasts. And he was like a six-figure business, maybe in the mid $300,000 range when I first interviewed him for Forbes. And you
Mhm.
could find that post on on Forbes, see exactly where he was. And then about a year and a half later, I spoke with him about something else. And he said, Elaine, those $1 million one person businesses you talk about, said, I'm about to become one. And I was really excited. And it turned out what he did was he hired some VAs and trained them in podcasting techniques. So there are certain things that to prepare a podcast, you might create digital assets, like
Mhm.
little things you can share on Twitter or Facebook, those little promos. And clients pay him a monthly fee to have access to the team. There's a single point of contact that if you hired him to do your podcast, you call me, say I'm the VA, and then I direct the team as to what you need. I
Mhm.
quality test it to make sure it's all good before I send it back to you. And they've been very happy with that, the clients. So he's been getting really good reviews in Clutch and other publications, which pulled up his Google ranking. And then that started pulling in very high quality clients who were more profitable than the clients he was already getting through word of mouth.
Mm.
So kind of put him on the national stage. And now the business is growing really fast. And I was on he did a podcast, it was like maybe a week ago, and he had to reschedule it. And when we were on the podcast, he said, Elaine, I didn't tell you why I had to reschedule the podcast. And I said, well, why was it? He said, I had COVID-19. And he was flat on his back, couldn't run his business, but he had put all these systems in place with the virtual assistants and everybody else that it ran smoothly without him for a couple of weeks. And so it put everything to the test. And I thought,
Wow.
great testament to the power of doing these things, because none of us really want to sit down and say, like, I mean, I don't want to do this. What if I were to outsource writing an article for my newsletter? What does a good article look like, to create a big document? But if I did that, then I could outsource it to somebody else and I don't have to write it myself. So if we can make ourselves do that, then we build a business that other people can run, and that's
Mhm.
more systematic and that has more scalability. And I think that's probably the number one thing most of us resist in one person businesses and very small businesses, is like thinking that someone else can do what we do.
Mhm.
But there are many, many ways to do it, and that's what I think people will get out of the book is encouragement to start thinking that way and say, what can I offload? Like, maybe I, like, some things in my business I can offload. I told you I was writing a CNBC story that I have to do all the work myself. Legally, I have to. I
Mhm.
cannot outsource any of it. But if I'm doing some other types of things, like, say I was editing a report for someone, in theory I could outsource that to somebody that I supervised, right, another
Mhm.
contractor, and just make sure that I signed off on it and that everything was done appropriately.
Mhm.
So the more we think in that way, the better. I love seeing it. I mean, I think to be a writer today, you have to be pretty entrepreneurial, because when I started my career, you really could have a staff job pretty much for most of your career. But there's been so much disruption in the media. There are not that many good jobs in media anymore. People are always getting laid off. So when I've spoken to groups of students, I've always said that you have to be an entrepreneur if you want to be a journalist today.
Mhm.
And there are all kinds of hybrids too. Like, if you're a social media influencer slash blogger or something, you're not exactly a journalist. You're not really covering the news, but you might touch on the news. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I actually think it's wonderful to see these new hybrids and
Mhm.
things, like this kind of mashup going on. And I love seeing new voices, because one of the problems historically in newsrooms that really never has improved much is there's not that much diversity. And I think when you get rid of the gatekeepers, right? Because the same gatekeepers have always run newsrooms, more or less, and they might have unconscious biases, and that leads to the newsrooms not being that diverse. Whatever the reason is, it hasn't improved at all. And I think these other outlets allow other voices to rise to the top, because if you're a fantastic writer, right, you write a great article and you put it on one of the new publications that's popping up, and people start sharing it, right, it's going to get to a lot of people and your voice is going to get heard. And I like seeing that. I feel like we need more voices, and we might not agree with all of them, but I like seeing them all anyway, because I just think it stimulates thinking. It's just good. It's a force of disruption, but a positive force. Well, usually when I mean, I think I told you I have 4 kids, right? So
Yep.
I get up at 5. And lately, this is a seasonal routine because my kids have online school, which started in September. I go to hot yoga. My
Mhm.
class is from 6 to 7 a.m. Then I get home, get the kids up and ready for school. And then pretty much all morning, I'm doing, writing or interviewing or that sort of thing. Then at lunch, my son is 10. I usually do some sort of active play date with him, like a short play date to make sure he has a break from the computer. So we'll go bike riding with a kid from the neighborhood. Today, a boy is going to come over from his school because they still have online school, and do school with him. Then
Mhm.
I get back to work when they're back in school again. Then there's, some different things after school. Sometimes, like, we have a pod today. We have this science teacher's coming and bringing his planetarium.
Mhm.
I luckily found him in my yoga class. Um, he did these assemblies at schools, but he couldn't keep doing it because of the
Right.
school being closed. So
Mhm.
we have this pod with these three boys, and then I have three girls who are teenagers, so they're a little more self-managing. But they like
Mhm.
two of my girls run track, one of my daughters does gymnastics. We do taekwondo, so the afternoon is kind of pockmarked with like different things that I have to drive people to, or my
Mhm.
husband is driving them to, and I write in between. I usually have like three bursts of writing energy every day. That's what I figured out. Because
Mhm.
when you talk about running a writing business, it's energy management, right? You can't just sit at your desk and write for 8 hours straight, because
Right.
at a certain point you just get fatigued and you wind up on Facebook or doing, Instagram, whatever it is,
Right.
wasting time. So I try to break up the day with physical activity.
Mhm.
If my kids, if it was a normal school year, usually what I would do is I would go walking or running or something in the early morning, then go to yoga at lunchtime. And then usually in the evening, we do something like a taekwondo class or whatever. Cause I find like I have to really stay active because I'm sitting at my desk a lot and it just drains my energy unless I'm really active.
Mhm.
Plus, with all these kids, they need to be active too. So I try to combine
Right.
different things, go on a bike ride with them, whatever the day will allow. And it's not always the same day to day. But for people who are trying to fit in writing, I think you really only need an hour and a half to 2 hours a day to be productive.
Mhm.
If I didn't have this many kids, I might not work as much, and maybe I would just do one article a week. Um, and as long as you have about an hour and a half a day, you can pretty much do that.
Mhm.
Um, I sometimes I write 3 articles a day, so
Wow.
it's a little different.
Yeah.
But I think if you guard your energy, it's really important because you can be much more productive. And I've become more ruthless about not doing exploratory calls where someone wants to pitch me a story or that sort of thing.
Mhm.
If I don't think it's a good fit, I will only take calls now where I feel like it's directly relevant to the stuff that I'm working on. When I was younger, I used to do that more because I sometimes wasn't sure how I might use certain information, or I just thought it might be a good contact for me. But now I just
Mhm.
have to guard my time more because it's like pretty much work, family, and keeping myself alive. Yeah,
Right.
and that's about all I have time for. It's hard when you work full time and have four kids, and and you don't want to be really scattered. I when
Right.
I'm with my kids, I want to be present and not distracted by a million things.